Postpartum is Forever. From Pain to Purpose, a memoir by Jane Israel Honikman. I have dedicated my postpartum diary to the families, including my own, touched by secrets, lack of social support, and silence surrounding our parenting experiences. August 1965. Dear Diary, I have a secret. I can't talk to anyone because I'm so ashamed and I feel really alone. I think I might be pregnant, but I can't believe this could be happening to me. I told my boyfriend, but he said it's not possible, so I suppose he's right. I guess maybe I'm not. I'm confused and afraid to tell anyone else. What would they think of me? I'm getting ready to leave for Europe, and I'm very excited about it. That's all I want to think about, and I think I'll be fine. September 1965. Dear Diary, I've decided to talk to you while I travel and live overseas. I feel so lonely, even in the middle of all these people. It was exciting visiting relatives before meeting up with my college friends in New York City. Sometimes I imagine myself asking for advice from others about finding out if I really am pregnant, but I don't have the courage. The words get stuck in my head every time I even think about saying something. Besides, I can't be pregnant. I don't feel any different. October. Dear Diary, sorry I haven't been writing, but I haven't wanted to share my sad, scared, and secret side even with you. I turned 20 years old when we were in Amsterdam on our student tour. We arrived in Copenhagen and met our foster families. Mine is wonderful. I'm so used to smiling and pretending that nothing is worrying me that it actually works most of the time. But then I hear that haunting, menacing voice in the back of my mind reminding me about my problem. I finally saw a doctor, and yes, I'm pregnant. I'm a liar and a fool. I hate myself for being so stupid. I've been terrified about hurting everyone I love by telling the truth, not to mention I've been so embarrassed and ashamed. I keep thinking it will just go away, like having a nightmare and then waking up. My life feels completely out of control right now. This nightmare is becoming my reality. November. I'm finally being semi-honest about the double life I'm leading. Both of my families know the truth about the pregnancy. My Danish parents have been incredibly supportive. They've even arranged for the adoption of the baby. Daddy says if I wanted to get married, I can, but I said no, that this wasn't a good way to start a family. I can sense the fluttering of life inside me now, but I've realized that I'm not capable of being a mother. I keep thinking of that old kid's poem. First comes love, then comes marriage, and then comes baby in the baby carriage. Those lines make me cry because I didn't do it right. I had such a fantasy in my mind of what this would be like when it finally happened to me. I'm learning the hard way that life isn't a fairy tale. My friends haven't said anything about my changes they may have noticed. I've bought some baggy dresses and just pretend I'm my usual happy self. For the December holidays, we're traveling to Southern Europe, and then they leave in January. I've told them a story about staying longer to absorb more European culture. What else would I tell them? The truth? I'm too embarrassed to admit to anyone that I'm a failure and a fraud. It's almost 1966, and I'm terrified. March 1966. Dear Diary, the view from the hospital window is bleak, with skeletal trees standing at attention over the brown lawn, which is mottled by patches of dirty snow. It's been a huge ordeal. I never dreamed I could be this strong and survive, but I had no choice. Once the other students left for home, I started lying about being married. I wore my opal ring with the stone facing in so it looked like a wedding band. At least then I could stop concealing my growing middle, and I even attended a childbirth preparation class. There was temporary comfort being surrounded by proud and happy pregnant women. I've discovered how dumb I am about my body. I've never learned anything about sex, much less pregnancy and birth. I got very sick with toxemia. I'd only seen a doctor a few times. At my last appointment, he gave me a note and told me to take a taxi immediately to go to this big hospital nearby. I felt so incredibly alone again and abandoned by my boyfriend, as well as ignorant and in a stupor of denial. My high blood pressure meant the baby was going to be induced, but until they stuck a tube in my arm, I didn't even understand the seriousness of what was happening. It was when they said the baby was going to be okay that I realized that we, weren't in any danger. The intense pain of labor receded only during a nightmare I had when they put a mask over my mouth. The pink elephants floating around me said that I'd been living in a dream and that I wasn't pregnant after all. They told me to push, but I couldn't understand. And then I was aware of a cry and they told me the baby was a girl. I remember being momentarily elated because I thought in my drug stupor that her parents already had a son. They could now be a complete family, that fantasy I'd always held for myself. I was now totally alone and missed the baby who had listened to my problems, heart beating within my womb. I never saw her. The sting of my tears rose from the sorrow in my heart. I've made a vow to myself now that whatever it takes, somehow I want to help prevent a repeat of this trauma. It started with a secret. No one else should have to feel this ashamed, sad, and alone because of being pregnant and having a baby. In spite of the overly warm hospital air, I feel a chill and a shudder. I can see beyond the wide wall surrounding the hospital gardens, and I think to myself that I want to keep this from happening to other women. August 1966. My boyfriend and I are getting married after all. The electricity we felt last summer when we first met was there again as soon as I returned from Denmark. We had written a few times during my pregnancy, and he tried to be supportive in his own way. I've told him a little about my ordeal, but I'm not certain he really understands. I've decided to think only of the future. Now we're ready to live by quote-unquote the rules. I want to graduate from college as I'd always planned, so I enrolled in summer school. I never talk about the baby. I had this fantasy about coming home. I would speak frankly and openly with my family about our baby and the adoption. What a silly idea. After all, the lying about why I stayed longer in Denmark, it is not the time for honesty now. The thought of telling the truth has been replaced by more silence and secret keeping. I have dreams about her and wonder if she's okay. It's as if I left a piece of my soul somewhere, floating in space. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be a mother. How sad that makes me feel. September 1967. What a whirlwind of make-believe we've danced through by these past months. Graduation, the wedding, the honeymoon. They were nearly postcard perfect, but marriage brings to mind an altogether different type of image. I'm reminded of our decision not to be parents whenever we argue. Learning to make a marriage work is so hard. I can't imagine how we could have been parents too. Somewhere far away she's growing up within a stable family, yet I feel a piercing stab of longing and regret. I secretly saved a copy of her passport photo. It's my only link with her. I wonder what she looks like now. I can't believe how up and down my emotions have been this past month. Daddy died on Father's Day. He didn't get to attend his only son-in-law's graduation, but he did know that we bought our first home and would be moving away. I cry all the time. He'll never know my children. We never spoke about my decision to keep his granddaughter from him. We didn't share our feelings at all. Mom kept secrets about his mental illness and erratic behavior to protect me, I recently found out. She always told me he loved me, but I never heard it from his lips and never will. The movers arrive tomorrow to pack our meager belongings from married student housing. We've decided we're ready to become parents. A husband, employment, a home. I wonder if I really am prepared. January 1971. Dear Diary, getting pregnant isn't easy this time. How ironic. What if I can't? Have I given away my firstborn only to discover that I can't have more children? I've been living silently in fear since I have no one in whom I can confide my deepest thoughts. I've made friends with a group of women in town, though. We belong to the American Association of University Women. Mom is so active with AAUW, and I've always pictured myself joining this organization once I had graduated and had a college degree. There are discussion topics, and I've joined one called Women Searching for Self. I certainly feel like I'm wandering around searching for something to give meaning to my life. I figured it would be motherhood, but now I'm beginning to question that expectation. Dear Diary, I can finally shout with pride, I'm pregnant. This is an incredible contrast after getting pregnant so easily the first time, and then being afraid and ashamed and terrified. I was embarrassed to confess to my doctor that I'd already had a baby, but he made no judgments. This time we're ready and so excited. I'll let my belly swell and boast about my impending parenthood together. This is what I've sacrificed and prayed for. I'll be a mother for real this time. My joy seems to have no bounds, and self-doubts have vanished. My AAUW friends are all mothers too, and I feel like I have a special status as a pregnant woman. I can talk about my changes with others who have already achieved this rank. I love being pregnant. Dear Diary, it's a boy. My dream has come true. His birth was also induced, but having my husband there was a stark contrast to feeling deserted by him in 1966. Yet something unexpected has happened this time. How ironic it seems that after leaving my firstborn and denying the truth about my previous pregnancy, I now feel inept and inadequate. I'd had an expectation that maternal instincts would wash over me and guide me through each day. It started when we came home from the security and support of the hospital. I put my baby in his cozy bed, stood beside him, and thought, now what do I do? From the triumph and exhilaration of his birth, I've plunged into this morass of feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, alone and frightened. The truth is, I'm clueless about this new job of being a parent, and even as a couple, we're nearly hopeless. At our baby's 2-week checkup, we discovered that he had not gained any weight and that he had an inguinal hernia. The doctor mentioned surgery. They added supplemental bottles to my obviously insufficient nursing routine, and we walked out of the doctor's office in a daze. I began to notice a pain in my stomach. Who's ever heard of a baby causing an ulcer? From then on, the tension has mounted. My husband knows less than I do and keeps expecting to learn from me. At one point, he stood in the doorway as I tried to nurse and said, I was starving as a child. I cried, and he turned away in frustration. The baby's schedule is like a Ferris wheel in high gear, whirling and spinning. I feel like a damp washcloth being wrung out for the 100th time as I nurse constantly. When I attended a nursing mothers group and confessed that I'd been using supplemental bottles, I could feel their glares of disapproval, not to mention their silent disgust. Mom came down for a few days, but couldn't or didn't want to stay. I feel incredibly alone. What am I going to do to survive this hideous existence? May. I get so blue in between the surges of love for my newborn. I've been crying over stupid things, like getting ink stains on the sheets when doing the wash. I stood in front of the washing machine and tears were pouring down my face, holding the villainous socks amid a pile of dirty laundry. I felt paralyzed by guilt that I can't seem to cope and to function well like all those other moms. Isn't this why I delayed being a mother? So I could do it right this time? At 10 weeks, a pediatrician told me to start the baby on solids because he wasn't gaining weight. I'm truly a failure as a nursing mom. The baby seems content, but I'm not. The other day I fainted while trying to contain a pain in my chest that Doctor checked me for physical ailments and then sent me home. He never asked how I was feeling emotionally, so I certainly didn't volunteer information about my vast sense of inadequacy, terrible mood swings, poor sleeping, lack of concentration and anxiousness. Maybe things will get better with time. Guess what? I'm still alive, and so is our son. It seems like a miracle, but my life as a mother has improved. I've made friends with other mothers at a study group called Child Study Interest Group. It's through AAW. They've helped me realize I'm not crazy or alone. It's a form of therapy, I guess. We've been using our intellect and frequent gatherings to share mutual concerns, and sometimes we laugh out loud. My stomach aches and headaches are not as frequent now, probably because I'm sleeping and eating better lately. I still can't get over how easy I thought this was going to be. My friends agree that reading all those expert opinions on how to parent isn't nearly as helpful as our sitting in the park sharing our experiences. Once I let my mask down a little and was partially honest about myself, it made such a difference in my behavior and my mood. That inner shame I feel about my secret past won't allow me ever to tell the whole truth, though. Dear Diary, March 1973. It's his first birthday. What an amazing year we've shared as a family. I've kept the first moments list of his physical development, teething, crawling, sleeping, eating, walking, talking. To be a witness to these miracles is worth the sleepless nights and torments of self-doubt. He's clearly a loving individual, energetic and bright. I'm still amazed that my lack of maternal instinct and self-confidence in those beginning weeks did not damage him. He's so loved and treasured. I still occasionally experience feelings of fear and dread, near panic, and pending loss, although these are tangled into a web of patience and pride and stubborn determination. That murky soup of emotional contrasts must be rather typical of motherhood. We've received birthday cards and messages from family and friends. My niece wrote to her cousin, quote, "You're growing up in a very strange world of todays and tomorrows. It has a lot of good sides and a few bad ones too. You won't always escape the bad things, nor can those who love you try to shield you forever. Life is full of puzzles, many of which you may never understand." End quote. Dear Diary, we're trying to get pregnant again. I want our son to have a sibling, and I want to raise more children. Am I crazy? Being a mother is so demanding and draining, and yet there's this piece of me that needs another baby. I survived those darker moments during his early months, and now I can only really remember the happy times. Our son is so active, I swear he could generate electricity if we could put him on a treadmill. I think I'm prepared for the unexpected next time around. Now I just hope I can be blessed with another chance to be a mommy. Dear Diary, I'm 8 months pregnant and so excited. We went to Disneyland as a last hurrah before the baby comes. While riding the steamboat, my son gave me a huge, big hug around my belly and said, "Mom, I hope the baby grows up to be just like me." What a loving and self-confident little man he is. I secretly worry about my ability to share the love I feel for him with his unborn sibling. I wonder if other mothers feel like this too. Is there a boundary to a mother's love? Actually, I'm more frightened by the memory of lost sleep. For good luck, I stroke my bulging abdomen in circles and say aloud, "You will sleep through the night," over and over. It can't hurt, and maybe he or she is listening. Sleep deprivation is painful. I think I can handle any stress if I'm allowed to sleep. We'll find out. It's a girl. My tears of joy at the sight of my beautiful daughter are mixed up with sadness at the loss of her memory of her lost sister. I've been blessed to have the second chance to raise a girl. The day we took her home, my feelings of elation were dashed by the doctor's announcement of her jaundice. Yet the homecoming was perfect, since Big Brother and Grandma were there to welcome her with kisses and hugs. But her condition only got worse, and those pains in my stomach and heart I had 3 and 9 years ago before had come back. She nurses so well we call her the super sucker, but I lie awake wondering if she's going to die. My moods come and go. After all, maybe I'm being punished for my previous sin. I can't talk to anyone about my fear of losing her, but if we do, it will be all my fault. My secret keeps haunting me. March. My baby girl is out of danger. Her jaundice has abated after weeks of pricking her tiny pink heels for blood tests. I'm not obsessing about her now and will try to stay happy. Her big brother continues to challenge and exhaust me, but we're bonded so tightly he makes me feel like silly putty. He can pull and stretch me in all directions, but I always bounce back into shape. I'm trying to avoid reaching a meltdown point and flowing out of control with my emotions. Against the advice of people who said he needs to be at home so he doesn't feel displaced by the baby, we enrolled him in a preschool after the baby was born. He seemed ready, so off he went to big boy school. I felt guilty, so I decided to volunteer one morning and told him I'd be there. He responded, "No, Mommy, it's my school." I ignored him, though. It isn't easy getting everyone ready, but after first taking him to school and nursing the baby and leaving her at a girlfriend's, I went back to volunteer. At first he didn't notice me as I helped sort papers in the corner across the brightly decorated playroom. I felt fulfilled as the quote-unquote perfect mom until he looked up, saw me, and shouted, "Get out of my school!" This piece of silly putty blushed and retreated. I cried as I drove myself back to get the baby. Maternal attachments and their accompanying emotions are incredibly complex. My girlfriend's support continues to be a source of comfort. I'm reminded by their similar stories that I'm not alone. Dear Diary, my vow of long ago has finally taken on a form and direction. I have a purpose now beyond being a mother and a wife, with energy coming from that unspoken force in the back of my mind. I still haven't told my friends that I gave away my first baby, because I feel such shame and embarrassment and unresolved guilt. My friends and I have launched a community-based, grassroots, self-help parent support program. We got funding from a grant from AAUW. It's an idea born from our own experiences and needs. We've named it Postpartum Education for Parents, PEP for short, and laughed about not calling the organization after birth. The word postpartum is not in the public vocabulary yet, but it is that period of time from birth to the first year of a baby's life. We've even become social pioneers by starting a warm line. The idea originated from our confessions that there were times after becoming first-time mothers that we might have called the mother's hotline in town, but we never had the nerve to do it. There's such a stigma attached to the idea that we were in any type of crisis. We know now, however, that what we felt were normal crazy thoughts. We each wished for someone to call so we could share worries and discuss options without being judged. So that's what we've designed. This vision is a partial fulfillment of my long ago vow. The next step is to start groups so new parents can get together and share in person. I was the volunteer on duty when the first phone call came through the warm line answering service. All I did was reassure the caller that what she was feeling and describing was okay. When she asked me how old my children were, her response to my answer was, "Oh, you've made it. I guess I will too." It's so simple, just being there for somebody. Privately, I moaned to myself, why, oh why wasn't there anyone for me after I gave birth? It isn't normal for women to feel so alone. One of my personal goals, another facet of my vow, has been to educate society about the role that volunteers and self-help play in the prevention of problems. So guess what? My article about starting PEP has been published. It's so exciting to see my name and our story in print. The magazine, American Baby, gave my story the title, Parents Helping Parents. We've been getting publicity about PEP in a few newspapers and magazines, so my friends and I wrote a short book about how we got started. It's called A Guide for Establishing a Parent Support Program in Your Community. It's becoming clear that I found my niche. Dear Diary, you'll never believe this, but I was featured in a national magazine, Parents, in an article called 6 Women Who Can Help You Cope. It's all about PEP, and I feel so proud, but a little embarrassed too. After all, I didn't start PEP alone. Anyway, the main point is to get the word out, and it seems to be happening. I've also applied for a personal grant from AAUW to conduct a research study about other postpartum support groups. I've become a member of the local junior league too. Another project I've helped launch is about childcare. What an amazing era it is for me as a young woman and mother. I see my gender continuing the struggle our foremothers started in the previous century. My mother gave me a t-shirt with the slogan, quote, "It's great to be a woman," on the back. She's my role model, and I want her to be proud of me. Dear Diary, I'm using my brain again. I've been really busy this year on a project called A Study of the Dynamics and Development of Postpartum Support Groups. Last April, I received a grant from AAUW. I was inspired to try for it after receiving over 400 letters requesting information about my article that was published in 1979. My intent was to determine whether there should be a national network of similar support groups for postpartum period. I heard back from 68 of the 120 groups I contacted, and then I compared their histories and services and financial backing. There seems to be a growing interest in providing services and resources to families, but only a few work specifically with maternal mental health. Now that it's completed, I wonder what will come of my study. Dear Diary, I've linked up with a new national organization called the Family Resource Coalition, which is based in Chicago. They're doing what I envisioned in my AUW study, starting a national clearinghouse of community-based parent support organizations. Their leader is my mentor. I went to see a postpartum parent support group in their community. I want to see one in every community like we have in Santa Barbara. The coalition's newsletter is printing an article I wrote about PEP, and I'll attend the first national conference on family support. Now this is progress. Dear Diary, it's amazing how one phone call can open doors and bring unimagined opportunity. An author, Carol Dix, called me the other day. She's living in New York City now and writing a book on postpartum depression. She wants my help in distributing a questionnaire to new parents and found PEP in her search for contacts. Our conversation made me realize how little I really understand about depression, especially when she asked specifically if I'd ever heard of Dr. James Hamilton or something called the Marseille Society. Her answer to my negative reply was, "Well, if you haven't, then no one has." She gave me Dr. Hamilton's telephone number in San Francisco, so I decided to call and introduce myself and tell him about PEP. His response was warm and welcoming. He asked me to send him information about PEP. Sometimes I can't believe I have the nerve to take such risks, but then I get this surge of courage from remembering my vow. I received a personal letter from Dr. Hamilton and a copy of the book he wrote in 1962 called Postpartum Psychiatric Problems. It's a thrill and an honor that he's interested in our program. He's invited me to an August Marseille Society meeting to speak about a, quote, normal sample of mothers. I'm especially puzzled by what he meant when he said in his letter, quote, this may be one long continuum. We may already have information on the effect of suppression of lactation done by people who don't want to nurse, but we are not intentionally avoiding postpartum distress. It's abundantly clear that I have a great deal to learn about how psychiatry fits into obstetrics and parenting. Dear Diary, I've just returned from the meeting the most remarkable professionals from around the world. I'm overwhelmed by the complexity of the information I received. I'm beginning to wonder if what I've felt off and on during my childbearing years is more than psychological. It's scary to think that I might have a real illness. Dr. Hamilton had faith in me, so I gulped back my insecurity and spoke out. My talk was called, quote, "A System of Action," unquote, and I only had 5 minutes to describe PEP and the role of non-medical self-help support volunteers. I sold several of our PEP books, one to a psychiatrist from Australia. It's looking like my original idea of starting a national network has become international. I feel like my dream of helping other people avoid what I've gone through is starting to become a reality. How amazing. I'm turning 40 this year, a time of transitions. An opportunity came my way to take part in a paid part-time position as the director of the Santa Barbara Birth Resource Center. I'm a new me now. They've asked me to think of someone who might want to apply for the position, but I thought of myself, why not me? It'll be a challenge, and I'm eager to try tackling parenting issues from a new perspective. I've been working to create change as a volunteer, so maybe being in an employee position will bring even newer opportunities. We'll see. Wish me luck. Dear Diary, I love being in charge. Carol Dix, who wrote The New Mother Syndrome, came and gave a lecture as our fundraiser at the Birth Resource Center. It was an honor to stand before a large audience in the hospital's auditorium and introduce her as my friend. She's the one who's opened my eyes to postpartum depression. I'm also working closely with a few PEP volunteers on a research project. We've designed a survey by telephone and in writing of the professionals in the community to develop a referral list. One volunteer has become a particularly dedicated friend. She's motivated by knowing a woman who suffered from severe postpartum depression. We started writing a brochure after realizing that the only ones available are from England. I'm noticing progress in my own search for the truth. It still feels like a puzzle, but I have no doubt that I'm on track towards solving it. Here's the speech, dear diary, I'm going to give as a member of a panel of local experts on postpartum adjustment. Quote, I'm here tonight as a mother and a resource person. I've been involved with this subject intimately for nearly 15 years. It's hard to believe that number because it seems like only yesterday that we brought our son home from the quote-unquote perfect delivery. You can guess that our world changed forever the day the hospital honeymoon was over and we faced our postpartum adjustment. I won't go into my story or the others that led to the forming of PEP 10 years ago. I'm not a medical expert, a social worker, or a counselor, but I am the voice of those women and their partners who remain silent. I'm now able to articulate the realities of what becoming a parent is all about. It is, in fact, a mixed blessing. I feel strongly that everyone experiences some form of negative reaction that balances the joys of birth and child rearing. No one is immune to postpartum adjustment. Each of us will react in his or her own way and in his or her own time to the challenges of parenthood. What I've said so far is not controversial or radical, so why am I saying it at all? Because number one, very few people have been honest enough to confront the myths of parenthood that our society perpetuates. Number two, hardly anyone is talking about the mental health half of our bodies. And number three, for hundreds of years, medical science has been baffled by and unable to adequately explain exactly why and how it is that some women, 1 in 10, experience such a negative reaction to childbirth that they require professional care. Tonight, you are witnessing a profound historical event. I'm proud to announce the publication of the first American brochure of its kind, called The Emotional You. It was written by my friend and myself and printed by a grant from the March of Dimes. It will be sold nationwide to combat the myths surrounding motherhood. You're participating in the birth of a new age of understanding of women's mental health. I'm determined to change the past and forge a new future that includes the emotional half of ourselves. I believe that the stability of families rests on this issue. I believe that we as consumers must speak up and ask the professionals listen to our feelings. We will no longer be silent, but vigilant in our need to care for ourselves, our partners, and our children. I pledge to no longer cry in silence and wipe my tears away, pretending that I'm not overwhelmed, lonely, or frightened. I can relate to each one of you, whatever your state of mental health. Together, we will ask questions, seek help if needed, and work toward a better tomorrow. End of quote. I wonder what the response will be to those lofty words. Dear Diary, after 3 years of traveling in England for meetings and learning from scientists, I've decided it was time to bring together those of us who have been working with mothers and their families as self-help supporters. Dr. Hamilton has agreed to speak at the first annual Postpartum Mental Health Conference in Santa Barbara. 2 Canadian postpartum groups are sending presenters, so it's truly an international affair. My goal is to lead the formation of a network of social support groups. 21 years ago, I made a vow to do something. I am still uncertain of the fate of my first offspring, but I am certain that I will not abandon this creation. July of 1988. Dear Diary, I'm back from our second annual meeting on women's mental health. It was held in Princeton, New Jersey. I'll be writing the bylaws for becoming an incorporated not-for-profit organization called Postpartum Support International, PSI for short. Dr. Hamilton suggested the name. I've only started leading a postpartum depression support group now in town. The more I listen to other women, the more I learn. I'm beginning to realize I have yet to deal with my own denial about my first baby. It's too painful and embarrassing to talk about it, but I'm being asked more and more, what happened to you? And it's beginning to seem unavoidable. A year later. It's been a hectic summer, although an exhilarating one. I traveled to Kansas City, Chicago, Seattle to give talks on postpartum depression. 2 important emotional turning points happened at my last stop. I invited my niece to stay with me during the annual PSI conference. I decided it was time to tell someone in my family the truth about my year in Denmark. She's only 5 years younger than I am, and we were raised almost like sisters. It was a relief to share my secret after all these years of silence. Her reaction was loving and supportive, not at all what I feared and expected. Oh, by the way, also, I was elected president of PSI at this meeting. What a positive step in my personal growth. October 1991. Dear Diary, I celebrated my 46th birthday with my Danish parents this year and have asked their assistance in helping me find my firstborn. I cannot believe that I've finally taken this enormous leap. They're very enthusiastic about my request. My husband knows about this decision, but the children don't. I told them each when they had turned 13 years old about the first baby. Their initial reaction was anger, but then they accepted it. I'll wait and see what develops before I tell anyone else. It's absolutely terrifying to contemplate what I've begun. I fear that might be bad news about my daughter, but I have to find out the truth. I've lived too long with this burden. I can't stand the weight of the pain any longer. A year later. It happened at last. I finally know she's alive, very well, and happy. I've just returned from a conference in Sweden, and on my way there I stayed in Copenhagen and learned about my first baby girl. She agreed to receive a letter from me, and so I wrote one asking her to forgive me, and I hold in my hand now her response. Dear Jane, thank you for your letter. It wasn't such a shock as you thought. My father asked me a while ago if it was okay for you to contact me, so I was more or less prepared. I've always known that I was adopted and that my mother was from the USA. I'm happy to know that your life turned out all right, that you married Terry and had 2 beautiful kids. I can only agree with you considering your decision 26 years ago. You did what was right and best for me. I have the most loving parents and have had a beautiful childhood. Tragically, I lost my mother 1.5 years ago, but I still have my father, and we are very close. I'm curious to know my roots, so I hope that this for us to correspond and perhaps one day to meet in the future." Unquote. I have found a profound sense of peace now. I didn't realize how troubled I've been all these years. Until this heaviness vanished from my soul, the truth has released me. I can only hope that my actions haven't hurt anyone else. July 1993. Dear Diary, my first baby and I have met in person. It's a miracle to watch as we adjust to this adventure. We're each experiencing our own emotional reactions as we discover this new relationship. I'm amazed and amused by our similarities. We find the same jokes funny and even have dislikes in common. There's definitely a powerful biological connection. She calls me Jane, and I've talked about her deep love for her own parents. Even if we never had met again, I'm relieved she knows about her biological background. She now has answers to questions that she's asked but no one else could answer. How good that makes me feel. Dear Diary, a wedding, yes! We now have a Danish son-in-law and have hosted our first family marriage ceremony and celebration. Who could have guessed that I'd be seeing my younger children standing beside the baby I never held, at her wedding no less. It was a highly charged emotional moment, and I let my tears flow. What joy! It's hard to believe sometimes, but I'm a grandmother now. I've held my grandbabies and reached the status of matriarch. My mother died in March of 1998, and I grieved for our family's loss. She was my mentor and best friend. We were extremely close, and yet I could never talk with her about my first pregnancy and its repercussions in my life. It took me 25 years to realize that I have to take care of myself, by myself, even though I feared hurting my mother. I did hurt her by reawakening that shame in my past. But in the end, she was able to acknowledge another granddaughter and her fourth great-grandson. I've learned through the years that there are two major barriers to finding a life of peace: denial and ignorance. We can tackle most of life's obstacles if we seek knowledge, yet that's not enough. I've become educated about depression, but it took confronting the truth of my own past before I could acknowledge and conquer my hidden sadness. I had a secret, but the truth has helped me heal. It's been a painful journey, yet I'm a wiser woman because I eventually took the path of honesty. I like myself and my life now. Thanks, Diary, for listening all this time.